everyone, I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One, the first episode in our fourth season of the One-on-One with John Evans podcast. So glad you can join us as we move into 2020. And our first guest of this new year is Reggie Shuford. Reggie is the executive director of the ACLU of Pennsylvania. Now you might ask, what does Reggie Shuford have to do with southeastern North Carolina? Reggie Shuford is a native of Wilmington and still has a lot of family members who live here in the Wilmington area. Reggie was the first African-American student to graduate from Cape Fear Academy, and he graduated as salutatorian of his class. He was the president of his UNC Law School graduating class as well. Reggie says the experiences of growing up in Wilmington, the third of 5 children, raised by a single mom on government assistance and living in the Creekwood public housing community, really set him on his career of fighting for civil rights. Reggie Shuford, native of Wilmington, now the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union of the state of Pennsylvania. Welcome to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure. I grew up watching WECT, so it's good to be on.
It's good to have you here. What are your memories of this town in southeastern North Carolina? Reggie, you grew up here, you went to high school here, went to North Carolina, but tell me some of your childhood memories of our town.
They're complicated, so I don't know how long we have, but if I'm known for one thing is telling the truth. So right. I would want to be honest in my my answer to you. And so that means there are a lot of good things about it, and then there were some things that were not as good. Among the good, all of my relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles were all there. So I felt the support of an extended family, and many of them remained there. So I still feel that Wilmington is home. Where a lot of family members continue to reside. There were some things about it, particularly as I was coming of age, that I believe don't often get a lot of discussion around race and integration and all of those things that I think will continue to haunt this town until we really have a larger discussion about it. And I feel like I lived and observed many of those kind of dynamics as I was growing up. So it's complicated, but all in all, I'm a huge fan of my hometown. I'm proud of it. I love to visit it. I come home a couple times a year, particularly the last week just before of August, typically the last week before Labor Day. Spend a week at Carolina Beach. I get to see family and friends and be on the beach and experiencing nature, all the things I like about Wilmington.
Growing up, and I've done some research and read some about you, Reggie, you were the third of 5 children, raised by a single mom, grew up on government assistance. So you're really, and your career has gone in a way where you have decided you were going to help people that maybe grew up or are in the same kind of situation you faced as a child. Is that a fair statement?
That's an absolutely accurate statement. And thank you for taking the time to do a little bit of research. To me, I'm no one special. So for anyone who would even spend time kind of trying to figure out what my background was, my path has been, I really appreciate. But it's precisely those experiences growing up, a poor kid with a single mother on welfare. Many times those institutions that had pledged to help us did not so much, kind of looked down their noses at us. I felt a very visceral reaction to what I later learned was injustice. And it very much informed my decision to become a civil rights lawyer and to become a voice for people who are often shut out of the conversation.
When did you pick up some of the of those earliest memories, and I'm talking about some of the things that you have highlighted in some of the talks you've given here, and some of your blog posts on Medium, Reggie, where you talk about experiencing some of those things early on in life. Can you point back to maybe one of those earliest times that, living here and growing up here, you experience some of those difficulties? Because we all have those memories, and early on memories are fleeting. They're 2 or 3 seconds here or there. But I imagine maybe when you were starting to grow up, 5, 6, 7 years old, you have that first memory of like, why did that happen that way, Mom? Or why did that happen that way, family member? Can you point back to that?
There were a number of such experiences, but I'll recall one when I was probably maybe 8 or 9 years old. We had missed the bus. I attended an elementary school around, where was it? Around Greenfield Lake.
Okay.
Trying to remember the name of the elementary school now. But in any case, the only thing that we could do would be to walk to school, and we were told that we absolutely could not do that because people would be out to get little black children, and the KKK, etc., were around, and so it was not safe for little black children to walk in certain neighborhoods, and that struck me as odd. It made me scared, frankly, for most of my childhood, that there would be people out there who would be out to get us merely because they did not like the color of our skin. Mm-hmm. But I was 6 years old when I decided that I would become a lawyer.
I heard that story too, because you asked a lot of questions as a kid, apparently, right?
That's exactly right. So you're asking the questions now, but typically I continue to ask a lot of questions. And but for folks who don't know the story, just whenever anybody would come visit us, I would kind of get them off in a corner, and I'd be really interested in who they were and what they cared about and what they liked and their relationships with their relatives, and did they like their brothers and sisters, and did they like to read, just a million questions. So on more than one occasion, I had people say to me, "Slow down, kid, you sound like a lawyer." And so I had an aha moment, even at age 6, that would be what I wanted to do. But it's precisely the experiences that you have asked me about today in terms of injustice and inequality and poverty, and really the disrespect that poor people often face and confront from private citizens, but also from the institutions that are designed to protect us. All of those things influenced my decision not just to become a lawyer. I didn't know any. But to become a civil rights lawyer, and to the extent that I could ask questions about inequality and poverty and injustice, then I thought pursuing a career in the law would allow me to do those things.
Well, I must say that, Reggie, you and I are the exceptions to the rule. I knew growing up that the good Lord blessed me with a big mouth and that I had to talk for a living. But, you know, at age 6, to know that you wanted to be a lawyer, most kids, young kids, pre-teenage and teenage kids, they are experiencing life. They're trying to figure their way in life. For those of us who had an idea early on that we knew what we wanted to do, for me it was a love of music and radio, and I got into radio and then ultimately into TV. But I oftentimes have to admit to myself, boy, I am the exception. Did you know you were the exception at the time? Because most kids at age 6, and at the age I realized it, don't know what they want to do.
I felt like I was an exception. Not that I was special in any way, but just that I was a little bit different. I was very academically oriented, even as a young kid, even as the child of someone of 2 parents who never graduated high school. And so when I graduated high school, I became the first one in a couple of generations in my family to do so, and then go to college and then the law school, etc. So I felt different. I felt always the support of my family, even if I was different. So yeah, I felt a little bit exceptional. And I never veered away from the path that I had stumbled into. which was a law in public service, a life in public service. And so I feel fortunate and blessed and really lucky that I figured out early on what my calling was, and that I've been able to follow that calling.
Yeah, me too. And I give thanks many times for recognizing that in myself. Exactly. And knowing, what I took the gift that the good Lord gave me and I made a career out of it, and you have done the same thing as well. Do you still have friends from your early years, from their childhood years, from your maybe early teenage years that you stay in touch with? I mean, Pennsylvania and Wilmington are basically, if I've got it down for making many trips back and forth, about 562 miles door to door to my parents' house anyway. But do you still keep in touch with a lot of the friends from those days and talk about some of those problems and talk about what needs to be done in this community?
I do, John. Those were the first friends that I ever had, and I consider them more like family than just friends. Like the neighbors I grew up with, the people I went to school with. I think social media allows us to continue to be in each other's lives, even if we're not living next door to each other. Mm-hmm. When we hear about somebody's passing, for example, we can express condolences or even attend the funeral. Right. So I think social media brings us closer together and helps us to continue those relationships that before social media, it was harder to do when we sort of grow up and move away. But as I said before, I still consider Wilmington home, even though I've lived away now for 30 years, I guess. They're more than that. And so whenever I get the opportunity to visit, I take advantage of that. But even short of that, I make sure that I'm remain in contact with people that I grew up with, people that I went to school with, both high school and in college and law school as well. So yeah, those relationships continue to inform the person that I am, inspire me to become a better person, to give back, because I've been blessed like you in many, many ways, and giving back actually makes me feel pretty good. Yeah. You get as much in return as you do from giving. And as I said before, I'm very much doing now in life what my earlier experiences impressed upon me. And so that means that I'm very much interested in making sure that the people who I grew up with, the people that I care about as much as anyone, who perhaps for many different other reasons did not have the same blessings or took different paths, that I remain an advocate for them, even if it's from a distance.
Tell me about your family. Tell me about your siblings and mom as you took your steps through high school and as you took your steps up through UNC and UNC Law and began to practice. How were they with what you were doing? I imagine cheerleading. I imagine they were behind you, but how did they kind of enter into your line of thinking? And I know it's a strange question, but what I'm asking is, did you see them in what you were trying to do? Did you see mom when you were trying to help a single mom? Did you see brothers and sisters when you were trying to help a family? Because they can be, along with being supportive, they can be almost an incentive to do things and get things done the right way.
They were my first cheerleaders, but also my first friends. My biggest inspirations, they continue to be so. My siblings, most of whom have all had kids. And so, the family line continues and they continue to be my inspiration. But they were always deeply supportive of me, even though I, for whatever reasons, took a different path from them. There was never jealousy or enmity. They always had my back. They still do. They still are as proud of me as anybody else that I know. And I'm still inspired to do the work that I do, in part because of some of the things that not only did they experience throughout their lives, but they continue to experience today. And when I'm fighting for other people, I definitely feel like I'm fighting for them as well. And I would do that until I no longer have breath in my body to do so.
Do they still live here in Wilmington?
Most of them live in Wilmington. If they're not in Wilmington, they're fairly close by.
Good deal. When you were growing up, did you play sports? were you involved in sports at all? Were you involved in the community and church? What was a young Reggie like?
Yeah, young Reggie was doing more than anything was reading in the room upstairs in his bedroom. But I also ran track in junior high school. I played football for a little while, but most of my activity had more to do with extracurricular activities. I was student government treasurer. I was this, I was that. I was Boy State. I was outstanding youth of New Hanover County my senior year of high school. So things like it was very college preparatory and academically oriented. And I will say this, I think I did not say it before, but the person who continues to be my biggest inspiration is no longer with us, and that is my mother. But she too had a dream of far more than she was able to realize in her life. But she was very intelligent, had the biggest heart possible, but ran into some difficult obstacles, and so she was never allowed really to fulfill her dreams. And I feel like part of my career and my own dreams and the achievement of them are an extension of what she set out for herself, but just could not kind of cross the finish line. So she continues to be my primary inspiration. And I think the best qualities that I inherited, I think I got them from her.
Can you take me back to the time you started at New Hanover High School, if I'm correct?
I sure did.
And then you were able to go over to Cape Fear Academy.
Yes.
Can you take me to the time when you heard you were going to go from New Hanover to Cape Fear Academy?
Yeah, I remember it like yesterday, actually, because it really changed the course of my life. So as I said, our neighbors were more like family to us. And my younger sister, Mariette, who still lives in Wilmington, had a best friend, Cece Muldrow, who lived directly across the street from us. We lived at 1011 North 30th Street, and the Muldrows lived at 1016 North 30th Street in Creekwood. And they were best friends, 2 years younger than I. Cece was an amazing athlete and phenomenal basketball player, and schools were already scouting her, including Cape Fear Academy. So they essentially recruited her as a ninth grader to come play basketball for Cape Fear Academy. And she was flattered and she was interested, but she was wary about being the only Black student there, as she would have been had she gone. And so the school said, well, we can, in addition to giving you a scholarship, CC, we can afford another scholarship for someone who's academically gifted. And suffice it to say, my sister, as lovely as she is, was just not as into books as I was.
Well said.
And thank you. And so they asked me if I would be interested. It all happened really quickly. And like Cece, I was very flattered. Like, we were kids who grew up in the housing projects. Like, this stuff didn't happen to us. And so I was very flattered. And then, our parents allowed us, my mother, her mother allowed us to go be interviewed by folks at Cape Fear Academy. I remember very clearly I had to tell them what my grades were that semester, and they were like all A+. And so they were deeply impressed and thought, now this kid could handle the academic rigor of Cape Fear Academy. And so, things kept moving on, and then we were both offered scholarships. So it would have been CC's second semester, started in January of her second semester of her freshman year, and me, I would be starting the second semester of my junior year. And we got scholarships to attend, and that's what we did.
And your time there, I have a quote that you said, you graduated as the salutatorian, as the first Black student at Cape Fear Academy. And you said, I don't know if it was in an article or if it was in one of your blog posts, but you said during your graduation speech there were racist catcalls from a few guys who had graduated a few years earlier. Do you remember the emotions and the feelings as that happened to you?
Very much so, because my brother, who sat back there on the bleachers when those guys were making those remarks, was very angry. And a schoolmate, Jay Nagel, who had graduated a year or two ahead of me, but his sister was in my class, heard those remarks as well, and they were all very angry. And I was more hurt than anything, but also not surprised because I knew of those guys' reputation. We didn't overlap at school, but they would come back and visit. And I know they didn't like me, and I know that the only reason they didn't like me was because I was Black. I was in a school, and I was graduating from there. But it was too momentous an occasion. The first Black graduate from the school. I'd given a speech that was well received. I'd made my folks proud because I was the first high school graduate in our family. All of those things very clearly outweighed the negativity that those guys were trying to inject into what was going on. I wasn't going to let them win, and I did not.
I didn't have the greatest of athletic careers in high school, and when I started to have some success in what I did, I went back for a couple of reunions and felt pretty good about what I had done in my life. Yeah. When was the time that you went back and stood up, stuck that chest out, and said, this is what I've done since I walked off that stage and you guys gave me those catcalls during my speech?
Well, it's really interesting. So I've been back a couple times. There have been a number of reunions, class reunions, but also the 50th anniversary of the university was in 2017, and I want to get ahead of myself. But I had a pretty good career in law school. I was class president. I was on an academic journal. I, after law school, clerked for the first African-American Supreme Court Justice of North Carolina. Was working at a private law firm, doing pretty well for myself. So I always felt pretty good about my accomplishments. And so pretty much whenever I went back, I felt pretty good. But yeah. I let my work and my accomplishments speak for themselves, and I still do that. As I've said to people who I mentor, I've never encountered an occasion where humility is not the better response as opposed to egotism. And I really believe in humility. And so, but I've always felt pretty good about my accomplishments since I've graduated from Cape Fear Academy. And I'm happy to talk about the most recent experience, actually with one of those guys who did the catcalling, whenever you're ready for me to talk about it.
Yeah, I said that because you actually posted about that. I think it was on Medium when you went back for the 50th anniversary. I think you actually confronted one of those guys later on and didn't let him forget about it.
Exactly. It's interesting, right? Because I think, to your point, a number of people have become aware of my success. So he actually came up to me. I never would have gone up to him, but he came up to me and was congratulating me on my success. And I said, thank you, but you didn't always feel that way. When I was here in high school, you taunted me and bullied me and tried to bully me, and which was not very cool. And he pretended that he didn't remember, but I didn't let him forget, at which point he apologized, expressed again how proud he was of my achievements, and then walked away. So it was significant to me that I, as I always do, stood up for myself in the moment and not let history be forgotten. I think more broadly than the situation we're talking about, when we don't talk about history, when we let it be forgotten, things repeat themselves. And I wasn't going to let that happen, because during that very weekend, that anniversary weekend, his best friend and others snuck in some Confederate memorabilia that had been previously prohibited from being introduced into that weekend. They did it anyway. So old habits die hard, right? And because of that, it was a mixed experience, as is typically the case when I kind of go home.
You went to UNC, went to UNC Law, and then, as you mentioned, you did clerk for Justice Henry Frey, the first black Chief Justice and the first black justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court. How much did he mean to you, mentor, somebody to look up to?
Everything to me, frankly. As you know from the study of my kind of childhood, I had a single mother. I didn't have really a healthy father figure to look up to. And so Justice Frey became that in many ways. And I remember his hard work. I remember his dignity. I remember him saying, when you are in the public eye, you need to comport yourself accordingly. And I still live by those rules today. He worked hard. He appreciated people. He was open about his faith. All of those things had a big impression on me, and I'm grateful. I got to see him last fall. We went to, actually it was earlier this year, not last fall. We got to go celebrate a birthday for him. He's still doing great. And I'm still lucky to have him in my life.
Was there another teacher? Was there someone perhaps in Wilmington as you were growing up who was also a father figure, or somebody who was responsible for a major turn in Reggie's life?
Absolutely, John. It wasn't a father figure per se, but there are in fact two teachers at Lake Forest Junior High. Actually, one had been a teacher and became a guidance counselor. And given all the chaos that was part of my life growing up, and I just want to be honest about those things. There was chaos at home and manifested itself often at school. I got in trouble a lot in junior high school, so I would be sent to the principal's office, who couldn't kind of figure out what to do with me either. They always said to me, Reggie, you're a great student, you're very smart, you do really well, but your behavioral issues are a problem. And so I would get sent also to the guidance counselor, and that guidance counselor was Minnie Williams. And so I had been referred to the principal or Miss Williams, as I recall, 17, 20 times my 7th grade year. And
Wow.
so at the end of my 7th grade year, Ms. Williams said to me, like, Reggie, like, I'm not quite sure what's going on with you, but here's what I'm gonna do. Notwithstanding your behavior issues, you're a great student. So I'm gonna actually go out on a limb, put my money where my mouth is, and have you placed in academically gifted. Back then it was called gifted and talented. So starting my 8th grade year, I was in gifted and talented. And that's really when my life turned itself around. I felt like someone really believed in me, like she stuck her neck out for me. No one else had been willing to do that. And I didn't want to let her down. So I really changed my ways. I stopped getting into trouble. I doubled down on my studying and my books. And it really changed the course of my life. The other person was Bonnie Daniel, who was my 9th grade English teacher, who liked my writing, who encouraged me to be thoughtful about the future, who took me to see a play by August Wilson when I was in 9th grade.
Wow.
Just went over and beyond. And more than anything was because they believed in me. They took a risk on me. I just did not want to let them down. And that really, that sealed the deal for me. I just started studying, and I was really on the right path from that moment.
So then tell me, Reggie, as you've gone through with somebody taking the opportunity and the chance, you say, on you, when did you turn that around and decide to pay it forward? I know you've done it in your legal career, and I know you fought for people. But when did you say, all right, I remember Now I'm going to be that person that I'm going to try to help someone away from legal, away from office, but take a young man or a young lady under your wing and do for them what was done for you?
I think I've always done that. In college, when I had an opportunity to be a big brother, I did it. When I was practicing law in Raleigh, I was a big brother then as well. Any opportunity I get today to give to charity, to mentor young people, I take advantage of that. I've always valued and prized mentorship. And so for me, that includes young lawyers from all walks of life, but it also includes people who are not pursuing law as a career. It's just important to have somebody who supports you, who believes in you, who can take time to spend with you. And so every opportunity to do that, I take. I value that. I feel like I had a couple of mentors in my life, but not consistently. And so I think the value of mentorship is huge, and I think not enough people avail themselves of it. Look, we're busy adults. We have families. We have work, all of those things. But as I said before, when you give, you receive so much in return. I have relatives, too, who I try to be available for when they need me as well.
For the people who don't know Reggie's background, you went from clerking for the justice. You moved to New York City. You worked for the ACLU's national office. You moved out to Oakland, California to work for a nonprofit. But then, I guess about 18 months later, less than 2 years later, you came back to Pennsylvania to take over as the head of the ACLU. That was in September of 2011. So most of your career has been in ACLU and in civil rights. Can you take me back again? I know I should have told you that I was going to go back through your memory a lot today.
It's okay, John.
But can you take me back to that first case where you helped somebody and got somebody something that they should have gotten and maybe not have gotten until you got involved? That first win that really made Reggie say, yeah, I know this is where I need to be?
Yeah, I'll tell you about a really memorable case that was in the earlier years of my practicing law. I was at the ACLU, living in New York City. And it was what is called driving while black, racial profiling. I was fortunate to represent a sergeant in the Army by the name of Rosano Gerald, who had been racially profiled with his young son, Gregory, when they were driving from Maryland to Oklahoma for a family reunion. Sergeant Gerald wanted his son, Gregory, to get to know those relatives better. And they were stopped in Oklahoma by an Oklahoma highway patrolman and were completely humiliated. They were accused of drug smuggling, and Sergeant Gerald was as clean as a whistle. They called the 2nd Patrol Unit, which was the K-9 unit that searched their car without their permission. All their stuff was thrown along the highway. They experienced the embarrassment of having cars drive by thinking that they were guilty of doing something. Sergeant Gerald and Gregory were separated and to do different cars. Sergeant Gerald was in the first car. His hands were handcuffed behind him, so he couldn't move. He couldn't turn around to see what was happening to his young son. Gregory was 9 or 10 at the time, and obviously was horrified. Sergeant Gerald was Gregory's hero. And to see his hero be humiliated as he was. And more importantly, Sergeant Gerald had promised Gregory, his only child, when he was a baby, that if he did nothing else in life, what he would do is always be there to protect him. I mean, Gregory was out of his sight in a car behind him with the barking German Shepherd dog. Sergeant Gerald felt he had let Gregory down, like he had broken his promise to take care of him and to always look after him. And so Sergeant Gerald approached me. We were able to sue. And sure, he got money, etc., out of it. But more importantly, he got dignity. some respect that had been stripped away from him in the process of that ordeal, a very hot day, August in Oklahoma. I don't know if you've ever been in Oklahoma in August, but take my word for it. Very, very hot. And something Sergeant Gerald said to me I'll never forget, which was, he said that I spent my entire adult life in the military, a proud soldier, fighting all over the world to protect democracy and America's ideals. And I come home in the 90s. This is not the 60s or the 50s, but in the 1990s, and I'm made to feel like a second-class citizen. So something is wrong with this picture. And so that is all the inspiration that I needed to want to decide to represent Sergeant Gerald and Gregory and help them get a good outcome for their litigation. But it also reminded me of why I went into the profession in the first place. It's to help precisely help people like Sergeant Gerald and Gregory. So I knew that I was doing the right thing, no matter how difficult litigation is, particularly when you're talking about racial discrimination, because nobody wants to be called racist. And so they fight back in every way they can. It's not always fighting fairly, but that's exactly what they do. But yeah, I knew I was doing the right thing. I knew I had followed my path, heeded my calling, and was doing the right thing when Sergeant Gerald and I would have those conversations.
That's an interesting case. I'm going to have to read up on that a little bit more because that did not come up in some of the research that I had done. You're an intense individual, I take it. How does Reggie relax when it's time to close the door and lock the door in the office? How does Reggie Shuford relax, or do you relax?
So, John, my intensity came across. I assume.
No, and I'm saying that and I say that in a way because I can tell in the way you approached, even in conversation, why that case was so important to you, because it was so important to that young man and his son. And my son is an attorney as well, and he's not in the litigation area, but I know what it takes to take the oath and to fight for somebody in the legal system. And that's why I say intense by, it seems to me like when you get involved in something like that, and in my reading, when you get involved, you see it all the way through until it's finished one way or the other. So what I meant by intense is when it's time, there's got to be a time, maybe not every day, but a couple of times a week that you've got to relax, that you've got to take that hat off. What do you do?
Yeah, I actually understood exactly what you meant. But let me just say this. You have nothing if you don't have your word, right? If you give your word and you don't honor it, then what do you have rather than if you don't have your reputation for integrity and to follow through on what you promise, what do you have? So yeah, I'm intense about honoring my commitments to my clients, to my family, the people I care about. And as I said, when I was growing up and experienced all the injustice and inequality that I and my friends and family experienced, I felt it viscerally. So that's why I do what I do, and I still feel it viscerally. And I'm intense about combating those ills in our society. But I do need a break, and I like to chill out sometimes. Be a good Netflix movie. I go to the gym on a regular basis. I run a marathon. I run half marathons. I like movies. I like TV. I like spending time with friends. I like to read. I like going out with folks for dinner. I'm pretty good, not perfect, at having a work-life balance that works for me, that allows me to work hard, but also to take time off when I need it. I'm going to try to take, at least 10 or so days off in the next couple of weeks. So we'll see. And I like to travel. I like to travel internationally. I feel really blessed to be able to do that. And so I travel when I can. I know how to have fun.
Well, people always ask me what I do because I cut my own grass, I run, but for me, and I'm an intense guy in doing what I do, those are times where even if I'm doing something of some physical labor, cutting the grass, running a 5K, whatever it is, it's a way of relaxing, but it's also a way of working my mind in different ways.
Yes.
Is that the same way with you?
It's absolutely that way. And in fact, I walk a lot. Like I'm always checking my watch to see how many steps I have. But it's not just for the accumulation of steps per se, but it's to process a lot of what I'm experiencing and taking in throughout the course of the day. It's really, I think it's really important to have that kind of down alone time to process stuff, but also kind of regenerate so that the next battle that presents itself, you're armed to kind of take it on. So yeah, absolutely.
Are you a Philadelphia Phillies fan yet?
I like the Phillies, yeah, but I spent 15 years in New York, so I like the Yankees too.
Oh no, you're not a Yankee fan in Philadelphia, are you?
I don't tell many people, so let's keep it just between the two of us.
Okay, I'll edit that part out. I grew up, as I told you, I grew up in the kind of like the Poconos area of Pennsylvania, so I grew up as a huge Phillies fan. One thing I do not miss, though, is I do not miss snowstorms before or after the week between Christmas and New Year's. I don't miss that at all. How long did it take you to get used to being in the Northeast when you grew up in the South, where you could play golf in January if you wanted to?
I'm not used to it yet. John, every year I say, why am I still here? Why haven't I moved south yet? And every year I threaten to do that. But the work keeps me here. I have some commitments I need to honor. But whenever I get the occasion, I certainly spend time in warmer climates, usually in North Carolina, but I don't limit myself to just that either. I don't think I'll ever get used to the cold weather, frankly. I just endure it.
I remember growing up and remember some of those March and April snowstorms. It's like, man, why did you do that to us, Mother Nature?
And it's almost, it's the closer we get to spring, the longer the latter part of March is. It's like it lasts forever. It feels like 6 months rather than a few weeks. Every year it's the same thing. And with climate issues, who knows if it's going to become even more extreme. So there you have it.
I hope not. That's why I'm glad I'm in Wilmington. I'm going to ask you one question, and this may have some tentacles to it, but in America now, you and I are roughly about the same age. But in America now, does the conversation about race need to be had? And what kind of conversation about race do we need to have in this country?
There is no doubt, John, that we need to have that conversation. We have not had it. It's about truth and reconciliation, and truth must precede reconciliation. Truth is those conversations that we're talking about. We need to know what has happened in our country and what continues to happen, in part because we're not addressing it. And that's the only way that reconciliation, i.e. moving beyond it, can happen. And it needs to happen really at every level. It needs to happen between parents and their children. It needs to happen between brothers and sisters. It needs to happen between cousins and aunts and uncles and family members. It needs to happen between and among colleagues. It needs to happen at the federal government level, at the state government level, at local levels, with citizens, with the residents of those places. It's a broad-based, perpetual conversation that needs to happen that we've not had. And until we have those conversations, these issues are going to continue to manifest itself one way or the other.
And what's the first step in having them? As someone who deals with civil rights cases on a daily basis, when people might not understand how they have done somebody wrong, will that conversation help the education on both sides in your mind?
Absolutely. And it has to be a give and take. It's not about pointing fingers at people and saying you're wrong for X, Y, and Z. It's more saying this is the state of things today. Mm-hmm. And it's this way because of what happened years and years ago, starting with slavery, but continuing beyond that. And if we don't talk about these things, racism is going to continue to rear its ugly head. And it doesn't need to be some formal conversation. It can be very casual. It can be over lunch. It's about meeting people where they are and giving them the benefit of the doubt. And also, a concept that I find really helpful in terms of allowing people to feel like they can have the conversation no matter how difficult. Because I'm not saying it's easy. These
Right.
conversations will necessarily be difficult, in part because we haven't practiced them enough to know how to do them really well. It's like a muscle that you haven't exercised, so it's allowed to atrophy, if you will. Certainly, is underdeveloped. So they're going to be difficult. Don't get me wrong, but they're critical to have. And one concept that I think assists those conversations is the concept of implicit bias, right? That we're all biased because we're flawed human beings. And because we are all flawed and all experience bias in some form or fashion, then we can all relate to the fact that it's even unconscious to us most of the time. We're not setting out to be an overt racist. It's the institutions and the culture that we inhabit that influence the way that we believe and the stereotypes that we have about the things we believe about other people. And so if we can all say that because we're flawed human beings who all experience bias in some form or fashion, we're on a level playing field. So let's have conversations where we're not pointing fingers at each other, but are trying to find a better way forward.
Does there also have to be, Reggie, some sense of forgiveness in understanding where somebody's family may have acted one way, but that person might not act the same way? Do you understand what I'm trying to say there?
I totally get what you're asking, John. I don't know if forgiveness is the word. I think acknowledgement and understanding are important. I have told people, and I really believe that forgiveness is an individual decision, and someone can decide to forgive or not. And it might be based on somebody's sincere contrition. Like, are they really sorry for whatever actions they were responsible for? If they weren't responsible for something, then maybe they don't need to be forgiven. But certainly, I think we need to acknowledge where people are coming from and hear their story and hear them out. And then we can decide how to move forward that way. But I do think everybody is entitled to some level of redemption, right? Nobody is as bad as the worst thing they've done. And I think with a sense of generosity, we can understand each other's perspectives a bit more, and then benefit all of us as a society.
Do you think social media has contributed at all to the "if you're not with me, you're against me" mentality that so many people have in this country right now? And I ask politicians this all the time. You see, they'll go to Raleigh, they'll go to Washington, D.C., and they say, well, we have to find common ground. But yet when you go on social media, at least what I see from my perspective is, there really is not much common ground. If you're not with me, you're against me.
Yeah, I think social media certainly exacerbates that tendency. And we live in a culture that is so extremely polarized right now that people aren't really willing to hear the other side of the story. And, the anonymity, if you will, of hiding behind a keyboard, right, allows people to be bold and to say things they might not say in person. And you can also, frankly, talk in the echo chambers and avoid conversations with people who believe differently from you. So social media certainly exacerbates those tendencies. And so we have to be mindful that that this culture that we live in, is cancel culture, right? Somebody makes one mistake, we cancel them out forever. And that's not to be a forgiving person to do that, right? And so how helpful is that? But I think that we need to curb in some of the tendencies to not see people as the fully kind of developed human beings that they are. We see them as a political party. We see them as a conservative or a liberal. We see them as black or white. We see them in one-dimensional ways that don't speak to their full humanity. And when we do that, we're able to cancel them out. And social media exacerbates that tendency.
I've taken a lot of your time, and it's very valuable. I have one more question for you. Would you be as successful as you are? Would you be where you are today had you grown up somewhere other than Wilmington, North Carolina?
That is a really good question, John, and nobody has ever asked me.
Well, then I've reached a new high in Reggie Shuford's career.
Thank you. I will say this. Certainly who I am and what I do. And to the extent that someone thinks I'm successful at all, so much of that has to do with my growing up in Wilmington, North Carolina. The good values of family and community, and doing good by others, all of those strong values really informed my career path, for sure. Likewise, the challenges of growing up with a single poor Black mother raising 5 children in a place that had fought against integrated schools and took a long time before integration happened, and where racial and residential segregation continued for many, many years. Those things also informed what I do today. And I think they contributed to my career path as well. So the good and the more challenging things. So I like to thank Wilmington, frankly, for setting me off on the path that I'm on currently. And don't know if I would have been as successful, but who knows? But I'm grateful for my experiences in Wilmington. And as I said before, it's still home.
Reggie Shuford, the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of the state of Pennsylvania. I really have enjoyed this conversation today in more ways of just getting to know Reggie, but I've learned something today, and I tell myself if I learn something every day, it's a good day.
It's my honor, my privilege. Thank you so much, John, for having me on.
A big thank you to Reggie Shuford for sparing some of his valuable time and joining us as the first guest of our brand new 4th season of the One-on-One with John Evans podcast. You can learn more about Reggie at his agency's website. It's ACLUPA.org. Before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please download and subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app that you use to enjoy your favorite shows. And if you would be so kind, please leave us a rating or a review. The more of those we have, the higher we'll be listed on the apps, the better chance we'll have of bringing in even more new listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for the first episode of the brand new season of One-on-One.